Am I audible? I think so. Okay. Thanks for the warm welcome. Welcome everyone. This is a workshop on hacking web applications and production with common web vulnerabilities for CTFs and real-life pentests. The structure for this workshop is mostly we'll be starting with some directory enumeration as to like how do we find hidden directories, followed by three vulnerabilities in particular, which is cross-site scripting, SQL injection, my favorite, and CSRF, which is cross-site request forgery. Oh, before that, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Ansh, fourth year C student here at Waterloo. Passionate about offensive, yes, particularly in the areas of network and physical. Recently, I've been fiddling around with RFID cloning, so that's fun. And I also do photography on the side, so that's my Instagram. You can check out my photos. The agenda for this workshop, as I mentioned, we'll be going through enumerating hidden directories, followed by cross-site scripting, SQL injection, and CSRF. I'll say the structure for each module is I'll be talking about what they are, why they're important to know about them, and then we'll jump on in practical demo. And we'll talk about some preventative measures, because I really do not want you guys to hit any of this on production environment, because yes, people can call 911 on you. Okay, we can get started. So hidden directories and how to find them. Well, whenever you're engaging in a CDF or in a real life pen testing scenario, when you have a web server online, there are definitely files and directories out there that are not stored by common names. So if I go, let's say uwater.ca/home, there are some files that can be something like, I don't know, maybe results 2080. Now that is a name that has not been in my mind, right? And then that's going to be skipped by me. How do I find those? Well, the thing is like, okay, you asked me like, why is it important? Well, sometimes they can have error logs, confidential files that can give me access to like what kind of server is it running on, and what kind of I can also have like usernames and all those kinds of files. And often we cannot see all of them. Some of them are also using the robots.txt file. Essentially, a robots.txt file is a web. This allows the web crawler to basically go on the website and not show the file up, not show the file as is. How do we solve this? Well, introducing GoBuster. So GoBuster is a tool written in Go programming language. It's very easy to use. All it just needs is a URL, that is what we'll be using, and a path to the word list. Essentially, a word list contains all the directories and files that have appeared in data breaches or are very common. And other than that, you can also use GoBuster for DNS subdomains and open cloud buckets. And yeah, so that's theory, but here it is. Essentially, GoBuster replaces every file from the word list. It hits the server, and if it's sort of like if I get a response code of 200, which means it's successful, 500 is internal server error, and it gives me a response code back, and I can check out manually if it works. We can actually jump in the practical demo right away. So for this workshop, as I mentioned, we'll be using an application called Juice Drop, which is essentially a purposefully deliberate vulnerable application. So what I want you to do is I want you to go to your Juice Shop directory, and we can actually hit npm start. Okay, so there we go. So that starts my Juice Shop on my local host server. So essentially, it's just like a local environment for me. It's not anywhere on the web, and I can use it for just like testing or just like security review structures. So if I actually head out to So yeah, this is what you'll see once you enter the OWASP shop. Essentially, if it's like more Amazon based, but it's a very, very vulnerable application. Like there's security flaws all around this application. Just gonna make sure. Okay. Yeah. So that's that. And okay, so I mentioned about robots.txt, so I'll just give you a demo on robots.txt. Okay, robots.txt is basically like, as I mentioned, it's a file that disallows the web crawler to not navigate this file. So usually it says disallow FTP. Now, FTP is another secure file transfer protocol. It basically tells you that it's another protocol that you use to share files to and from a web server on the machine. So it says disallow FTP. Well, it's actually a valid link. So if I can go to FTP. Ooh, okay, there we go. So we get like some encrypted announcements. There's some files. Legal seems fun. I can go on quarantine. And you see there's like some malware files. Now, these are some files that you wouldn't have found unless you went to robots.txt specifically. But there's one more way you can actually try getting all these files. So let's try, if I want to go to the admin dashboard, because that's a relatively known name. There's nothing admin, right? There's nothing admin. Let's try something else. Maybe files. See, there's nothing like that. I mean, I'm just like trying to manually search up names that I feel are available, that I feel I can find them, but they're not. So what I'll actually do is I'll go to GoBuster. So I'll use another window. The syntax for GoBuster is you go for the do itself, followed by dir, which means you want to perform a directory enumeration that you want to find all these hidden directories, followed by the dash u, which means the URL. And you just mention the URL you want. So in our case, it would be the localhost 3000. So I'm just going to do. Yeah, I'll just remove the files. Yeah. And we also need a word list. As I mentioned, word list is a common list that has all these, directory names that have already appeared in breaches or are relatively known. So we'll go for a word list. And then for the purpose of this workshop, I actually downloaded a word list called the directory list. How do I have this list? Well, there's actually a link to your SecList GitHub repo. This is essentially a repository for all word lists whatsoever. So you can see, you have web services, you have SQL. If I can actually, and if you go on file systems, further down the line, you have usernames, passwords. So what I want you to do is go on SecLists, discovery web content, scroll down, and essentially you can see the directory list 2.3. So that's the one that I'll be using. Yeah, you can download this file and navigate to the terminal and have your directory list over here in the command. And yeah, that's essentially all you need. But it gives me an error. Why? Because certain times there are links in the word list that GoBuster knows it's a fake one, but essentially your target does give 200. 200 is it's a green code, which means it's an okay, but GoBuster knows it's not true. So what I'll actually do is I'll exclude the length that I don't want this length essentially, which is 3748. I'll just do exclude. So if I run now, you see that it's actually starting directory enumeration. If you also see on your localhost server, it's started saying block illegal activity. So naturally, there is a security system in place that knows that, okay, some kind of enumeration is happening. Yeah, and then you also see the response codes, which is 200 is okay, 500 is server error, and we'll just let it wait for some time. Assets actually seems something that I would love to play with. API could have something, FTP, as I mentioned. So we went to FTP through robots.txt, but there's another way we can actually get to FTP. And we'll just let it run for some more time. Ooh, restricted sounds fun because restricted is something that basically, as an attacker, I want to go to see if I have any confidential files or not. Um, Metrics could be like, how the metrics are calculated. Snippets could be code snippets. I think this is where we could stop. So I'm just going to like hit Control C just for it to stop. Well, there's video. Okay, so let's check out video. Why not? So I'm gonna go back to my juice shop. Oh, it's right there. And I'll try video. So Wow.
OWASP is a nonprofit that stands for the.
I wouldn't have found that video if it wasn't for GoBuster. So there's video. What else? There's metrics. Let's check out if there's maybe a way I can see how data is being calculated. Oh, there you go. So there's I can see some code written. I can try analyzing as to how it's what exactly the code is. But essentially the crux for this module was that I used a tool just to find out there's a hidden files or something on this web server. Which actually takes us to the next module, which is any questions on this? I guess we can move on then. So sounds good. So we can actually talk about cross-site scripting and why it can be avoided. Well, okay, this is a bit harder to understand, so you have to stay with me on this one. Okay, so let's start. Think about this. You have a whiteboard, right? And you want to actually write something on the whiteboard. So you go to the whiteboard, you write, hey there, and then the whiteboard prints it out. But there's also one mischievous kid in your class who does not want to write. He rather wants to actually fiddle around with the configuration. He wants to do something messy. Okay, he goes out, plays around with the wires and does something. And essentially what now happens is every single time you go on the whiteboard and you write something, it prints a jarring sound. And as a user, as a child, I don't think I want that jarring sound to be there every single time I go there, right? Essentially, that's the idea for cross-site scripting, which basically means that you try to see if there's any vulnerable website. Essentially, I want to look for user input, and if I can manipulate some website to return a malicious JS, now I can actually place a file, or I can try to make sure that it runs my code, and I can actually change the entire link and send it to a victim I want, and have the victim download the virus and basically grab hold of their machine. It's also it's cat on websites that don't validate the input, which means that essentially there are some websites, if they don't validate the input and if they actually run the code as is, that's when it actually it's really catastrophic. So yeah, so the user interacts with, let's say, a vulnerable website. There's a threat actor that realizes that, I can actually place a script on the server or on the website itself. And when the threat actor actually does that, it actually sends this entire link to the user such that when the user now interacts, it actually downloads the keylogger.js file, in this case, on the user's machine. Essentially, keylogger.js is basically trying to understand, their movements on the keyboard. I can track down, okay, what, maybe this could be the username and this could be the password. And at the same time, I'll have results on my end if I'm a threat actor. But the question is, why am I even learning XSS? What joy is it to bring XSS? Well, it's actually one of the most frequent members of the OWASP top 10. Essentially speaking, OWASP top 10 is a list of top 10 vulnerabilities that exist in modern web applications. No matter what you do, there is still a feasible query that can actually be crafted. Just recently, I had a very recent internship with this core, and we were actually fiddling around with an internal web application. My team was designed to test out the security for that, and within a day, I found a cross-site scripting vulnerability. It wasn't that hard. So yeah, it's actually very useful if don't have any malpractices. But yeah, so it's important to learn about cross-site scripting. The types, well, there are three major types, I would say. Reflected is more directed towards the unique victim. It's essentially speaking, you go on a website and you try to put some JavaScript code, and then it just stays there for a while, but it's not permanent. Like if I destroy my server, if I rebuild it again, or if I reload the web page, it's not persistent, is what I would say. The attacker can send the web page to the malicious JS payload to the victim in order to gain access. So I can literally, as I mentioned, have a JavaScript file and I can send it off to the victim. And if they download it, I can actually grab hold of their machine. Stored, I think the name somewhat implies it actually affects your server. So if I have a stored XSS, it means that I can actually try to make sure that it's persistent for long. And any new request made by the user, so when it's directly fetching from the server itself, it will contain the malicious payload that I just ejected. And DOM-based, it's a bit harder to understand the difference between DOM-based and reflective. But essentially, DOM-based does not affect the server, but it rather affects the document object model. In the sense, if I take a code base, for example, I have something like, I'm taking in a URL parameter. I'm taking in some, user parameter. But here's the vulnerability. I'm not really checking anything if it's valid or not. And I'm just like directly documenting inside inner HTML, which means I'm directly modifying my HTML web page to make sure that input that I just took in from the user is reflected out. So that is actually not something I want. Okay, so now we can actually jump into a practical demo on this. For this, what I want you to do is go onto the XSS playground. And if you go on the link, you'll see that what this is just a search input. I can just try like basic, inputs such as alert one. So I'll just like write out the alert one input. It says no CTFs allowed. Also because alert one is a very commonly known way to detect cross-site scripting. Browsers know it, mobile applications know it, so now they basically try to make sure that if there's any input with script tags in it, just render it useless. But is that the only query I can use? I don't think so. So let's try something else. Wow. Okay, so I tried a different query this time, and the browser actually ran it as code. Essentially, what iframe does is it creates a small frame box for you, followed by the source that I want to run a JavaScript function, and the UR hack is a text that I want. So this is just one way for me to detect that there's an XSS query. And essentially, that's what I've been doing in this module. Like our module basically is designed to make sure we just detect it, because I don't want any malicious files to be placed, and I download them on my computer and my computer gets affected. So that's the playground if you want to play with, you can try different queries. Let's actually see if it's on OWASP G-Shock. So I'm just going to go to OWASP. So the one thing I also mentioned was we need to look for an input. So something like, if I go around, maybe the search looks interesting. Okay, this is like an input. So I can try the first one that I mentioned, which was yeah, see, even script alert one does not work on that. But actually, let's try the one that I just tried. So we'll try the iframe one on this thing. There you go. So that's actually a vulnerability. And once you guys try it, you'll actually see that, you'll see like a congratulations message on your end. So yeah, that's basically how process scripting works. I know I might be cheating on this, but if you go on to localhost 3000, and if you go to this link called scoreboard, it essentially gives you all the different challenges that you have. Oh, that's interesting. Let's try. Oh, it's a score. Okay. Yeah, for some reason, I don't know, it's like taking in a hash. But essentially, you see, like, okay, that's the DOM exercise that we just did. If you want to, like, you can basically try to copy paste this payload right here. no, I'm not gonna play the whole song, but essentially the idea is like I was able to inject this music file, which means I can definitely try to inject some virus or malware and then send this entire link to the victim, thinking it's safe, but in the background that virus actually runs on the victim and it's not good. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. One more thing I can talk about is there's something called document.domain, which essentially gives me an idea of what my web server is running on. So if I try document.domain on this thing, so I'll actually use an image tag for this. So if I do image, I don't really have an image, so I'm just going to do source equals, I don't know, X, which is going to give me an error. So on error, I want it to run this function called document.domain. So I'll just do that. We did localhost. So if I actually go on production environment and do that, it will sort of give me an idea, like maybe an IP address for the web server, or just some knowledge about what the web server, like what the web application is using as a server to run now. So that's the key idea for cross-site scripting. We have some preventative measures. Well, as I said, the first thing that I had to look for was the user input. So definitely avoid user input if possible. Now, naturally for login forms or like, user metrics, if that's not possible, right? So you want to have some sort of an input validation. So if there's specific keywords like script, image, iframe, just block those because it doesn't make sense for me to use a script in an email, right? Followed by filtering. Convert the code blocks to text, essentially. You can use escape characters and URL encodings to make sure that the server knows that the input that the user is fetching it, it's has to run as a text and not as code block as is. So yeah, that's some preventative measures. Any questions? Oh, I guess we can move on. Okay, I'll actually go for SQL injection, one of my favorites. Okay, I said SQL injection, but I don't know what SQL is. Okay, SQL is basically a language that is used to handle databases, that is used to handle data in RDBMS systems. What is RDBMS? Well, we have a big database. All the data is stored in tables, and those tables are further stored in databases. It has its own unique syntax to create, update, modify, delete records, and yeah, that's pretty much what SQL is. Um, what is the syntax? Well, you actually create a table, you use insert into those values. You can also display information in a different format. So actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it like a small demo on SQL. So I'm going to go to this website called dbfiddle, and I'll just like write some SQL queries. So what I did was I made a small query which essentially allowed me to like create some table called users. The format is after that I have a column name followed by the data type I want in that column. So varchar means variable characters. So email can have at the rate and a period sign. So I just use that. Similarly for passwords, I use var like just in case you want a dollar sign along with letters, numbers, and stuff. If I run this query, it won't return anything because I just like created a table. But what I try now to do is I'll try to like insert some data into it. So the way you actually insert data is you insert into the table name followed by values and what kind of values do you want to insert. So I have the email and password, for example. I'll just run this again. Yeah, it won't work because it just inserted. But yeah, if I were to actually like try out some SQL syntax in sense, like, okay, I want to like see what kind of tables or how many tables there are. So just like I can show tables. So I can see that, there is some table called users. The way to like fetch information from that table is select star query. So I'll just write the query for you. There you go. So we see that select star from users. Star is a wildcard character, which means that it displays all kinds of information that's valid. Select star from users means select everything from users. I can also have specific columns. So let's say I just want the email column. So I'll just like go, what column do I need? And I'll just do select email from users. It just gives me like only the email section. And let's say I want everything wherever the email is admin@hack the north. So in that case, we have a conditional query which says where. There you go. So it only returns me it returns me everything from the table users with email matches admin@hack the north. So I get the email as well as the passwords. So that is just an intro on what we're going to do with SQL injection. Okay, so we talked about SQL, but what exactly is SQL injection? Well, how about if we can execute some sort of malicious failure on a SQL statement to bypass, like we essentially don't want the server to like, execute the SQL statement on our behalf. We just wanted to bypass the whole thing. We can dump confidential information, as I said, show tables. I can also do show databases to get database information. And I can try to like, bypass authorization pages, as we'll see now. It's carried out in website that uses the SQL database. So yes, the first thing has to be that if it's only valid in those websites that use the SQL database and that don't validate the input. Well, is it really that big of a deal? Essentially, yes. SQL injection is also a big member of the OWASP top 10. It's a common attack vector in applications using SQL databases. So essentially, whenever you're in a scenario like that, and if you have a SQL database, you try to first think about SQL injection. And if I use SQL injection in combination with other vulnerabilities, with CSRF or something else, it becomes really, really nasty because I can actually try to like change passwords or do something or the other. Um, yeah, let's actually do the practical demo. For this step, we actually have two things. So as I mentioned in the hack pack, if you're using Firefox, there's an extension called Foxy Proxy. If you go on the options, you can actually do proxies. If you go on add, you can write out any title, but for hostname, I want you to go 127.0.0.1, which is your local host. And the port should be 8080 in that sense, because you want to have every single request that's made by your machine being, intercepted. So yeah, that's essentially what my settings for this one are. And once you're done, you can actually hit save. I can actually wait for people to catch up on and go as well. Okay, I can actually go forward. So yeah, that's one of the settings I want. The other thing I mentioned was you have to have BurpSuite. So once you log into Burp and once you like, create a new default module, you'll actually be introduced to this screen. Essentially what BurpSuite is it allows you to intercept all the requests made by your machine to the server and back and forth. So whatever requests your machine makes to the server and whatever response you get back is something you can see on this. Um, for instance, if I let's say go on, just gonna go close. Right. So for me to actually intercept my request, I'll just enable the burp suite setting on this, and I'll actually do the intercept is on option. So if I reload the page, you see that every request I make, so yeah, I can see that my machine is making a get request, which is essentially get the homepage, the user agent, and all different fields. I'll just keep going forward, forward. It says also says request to what? I'll just keep going forward. So yeah, these are essentially all the requests being made, and it gets a bit tedious. So you can just like put intercept off, and that's how it is. So like once the website gets loaded. Now, interesting. So in this case, what I should do is I'm gonna go to this account. I'm gonna log in. Now, I don't have any information about how do I even log in, right? Okay. So how do we find out about something? Let's say I just want to like directly go into admin's page. Like I just want to like attack his method, right? So I'm just gonna do like I'm just gonna search around if something looks interesting. Um, let's see. So there's some review. I get some. Okay, so I get this email for admin. So I know this exists, like, but okay. I'm just gonna like copy this email. Just like randomly try brute forcing, okay. Maybe admin might work. Let's just keep that. Okay, yeah, that was a fair guess. Something else. Any ideas on what I can try? Maybe admin 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, well, that also would not work. Hmm. Let's try intercepting this request and seeing if I can actually fiddle around. So I'll just okay, so that's on burp. I'll just do intercept is on. If I do login again. So there we go. So that's the request. So whenever I hit the login button, it's hitting the endpoint for login. This is the data that's actually being gone. And then if I keep forwarding, and essentially to a point, it's just like there's no more requests. So that means that, okay, you know what? All the requests have been done. Hmm. Okay, let's try something else. So it says email, right? What if I tried doing some other input along with email? Because I know admin exists, but what if I try maybe a hash sign? I don't know. So I'll just do intercept on. Oh, yeah, it's pretty much the same. Like nothing is working. Okay. If I go back on, let's say dbfiddle, the one I used, something with this gives me, okay, maybe what if I try, apostrophe sign? I don't know. I'm just like trying to randomly brute force and see how it works out. So I'll try this. Okay. There's also one thing you can do. So if you have a request that you really want to test out, you can just do a right click and you can go to repeater. Essentially, repeater allows you to like, keep repeating on the request once you hit the endpoint. So this is my data. I just want to see what kind of request this particular response gets. Like what kind of response does this particular request get? Wow, that is interesting because I just tried a random apostrophe and it says SQLite error. That gives me a pretty big hint that, okay, there's a SQL database being used. But if I keep going down, there's actually the query that's being used. So, okay, so let's actually try to see what it is. So I'm just going to copy this query and we'll figure it out. I'll just like switch off my burp for this. Okay. So essentially what I did was I just added a random apostrophe, but it gave me like a pretty big error. Now, why was that? So if it looks like if you were this over and if you try looking at the query, it says, okay, well, you select everything from, this database where email is essentially, so it starts off within this. Okay, so that's the opening and the closing apostrophe. Then there's a lingering apostrophe, and it's not there anywhere. Essentially, like it's lingering. There's no closing apostrophe for it, right? Which is essentially what it gave us the error for. Now, I know there's two things. Like I know I can control the email, I can control the password, but out of those two things, I just know one, that is just the email. Is there any way I can try maybe, like I know okay, apostrophe is accepted as a apostrophe character and not a text. Is there anything I can do to maybe try such that, this entire query is not worked out? Any ideas? Well, what if, okay, let's try this. So how do we comment in SQL? I can just essentially have, and I don't know, something. And essentially how we comment out this stuff is you have a double dash followed by a space. So essentially this thing entirely is commented out. What if I try to use that over here? So something like dash dash and I do a space. So this gives you a grayed out, which means this won't even be executed in the first place because your query stops right at this apostrophe. And I know this should give me a true result because I saw it like while searching for an admin email and it was in the database. So I'll just try that. So I'll just try an apostrophe. I'll just do dash dash followed by space. And okay, so I know the password field is being commented out, but I can literally just like write anything. So I can literally have, let's say, admin12345 and actually stop the intercept first. So I'll do admin12345. Wow, okay, there we go. And if you actually go on account, you're actually logged in as admin. So okay, let's go back on what I did. So what I did was I was up until here, right? I got this query. I realized that, okay, if I send out an apostrophe, it's being taken as an apostrophe character, which means that the server interprets this as the ending apostrophe. And there's a lingering apostrophe somewhere. And the server was like, okay, that's not a valid SQL query. But what if I also had a comment? So if I commented out, like if I had comments as a part of my input, that basically comments out the rest of the entire query and it's gone. You can also take a look at if I try to do on this instance. So I'll just like modify this query so I can have something within this local database. Yeah, so that won't work because there's there's passwords actually. Yeah, so it gives me 0 results because you want to have that the email and so it has to be a true and a true operation. But essentially what I did was I just added an apostrophe to like stop the query followed by a commenting out. And essentially this thing comments out. So if I run this query, this gives me the database because this is where I stop my query. And I don't care about what the rest of the stuff is. Essentially, that's what I tried to do with this, and I was able to log into that then. And that was the practical demo. We'll actually go further on. Is there a way to prevent? So one of the biggest giveaways for me was when the server actually returned me a SQLite, error, which essentially was this thing. Like I basically got to know that I can try using SQL injection only because I got to know that there's a SQL database being used. Okay, so how can we handle that? Well, the server should not return any kind of error. Even when you go on a login page, you have invalid email or password. That's deliberately there just so you cannot know if your email is correct or password is wrong or the other way around. We want you to like keep thinking, oh, maybe both of them are wrong, and that's why we have invalid email or password. Okay, input validation. Well, naturally, if I have, like an email, there's no reason for me to use an apostrophe. So that's a red flag. I cannot use that. So that's an input validation. Like in case like, inputs that are irrelevant to the type of the input wanted, just flag them or don't even execute them. And parameterized query. So if I try to use like, something along with the lines of if I have an input and if I try to parameterize that, that's essentially what it is. Like I'm trying to basically execute the query with those parameterized inputs. Which brings us to the end. So any questions for SQL injection? Yeah,
So what would be the difference between BurpSuite and like Wireshark, for example?
BurpSuite is more web. Like if you have like web applications, that's what you use for intercepting web requests. Wireshark is a tool for network mostly. You can actually have individual packet information. So you don't get much information about the request being made, but sort of the data back is the data that's being sent out. I guess we can go on to the last module, which is cross-site request forgery. Essentially, okay, what is CSRF? Well, the process of imitating someone else. Essentially, what I'm trying to say is if I'm able to get into credentials for someone else, and if I perform some unwanted actions that the user did not want or did not intend to, That is me like changing their usernames or like, transferring funds from their account. That is something I can do. Is it solely just impersonating users? I wouldn't say so. I can also have the users, perform a trick. Like I can have them perform a trick that I did not want them to. Like they did not want to, or you know what? I can also maybe try crafting a phishing link or something and then sending it to them and then compromising their account. It somewhat overlaps with IDOR, which is insecure direct object reference. That essentially means that, if I'm unauthorized and if I'm able to, like, let's say view their funds or like, view their course grades, that is something I would want, right? So yeah, it somewhat differs from IDOR in that sense. You can actually jump into the practical demo with this one. So again, last time we logged in for SQL injection, I can try maybe changing, I don't know, the password for admin. So I logged in with SQL injection, but what if I want to change the password, right? I'll do it. What I'll do is I'll again open Burp. So I have my BurpSuite setting, the intercept is off. So I'm just gonna go on account. I'll do privacy and security. I'll try to change the password. But the caveat is I do need a current password. Okay. It's just the client side, right? Like actually, okay, let's try intercepting this request first. So I'll just like type in a random value. And I'm just gonna like put a new password as, let's say, hack the north. Same thing with this thing. So I'm just gonna try doing hack the north. I'll make sure my intercept here is on my setting to burp, and I'll make sure the intercept is on. Oh, they do match. Okay. I'll just like try changing it. And as I see, I think I missed the request. Just gonna try doing it again. So let's try. So there you go. So it says that, okay, there is some, change password API route, and the current one is admin, hack the north, and it's the same thing. But essentially, it's just this UI. That is a client side that's asking me for current password. What if the server really doesn't check it? What if I just try deleting this and I just want to see if it works? So I'm just going to do, I'm just going to send it the new and the repeat because that's essentially what I want. So I'm just going to keep forwarding. Oh, it gave me your password successfully changed. But do I trust it? I don't think so. So what I'll just like keep doing, I think it's finished. So I'll just like do it off. I'll try logging out, try logging back in. So I'll just try admin. But this time I won't actually use my payload. I'll actually try to use the password that I just used to reset. So I'll just try hack the north. Oh, there we go. So that's the new password that we just used to log into our admin file. Okay, what else can we do with CSRF? Okay, so let's see the basket. So we have like 3 items in the basket, but what if I could actually try to see some other user's basket, right? Let's try to intercept the request again. So we have the burp setting, we have the intercept on. I'm just gonna reload this page. Okay, keep going forward, keep going forward. So essentially, when I click on the Your Basket page, it gives me, okay, you know what, there is a REST basket 1, right? But again, as I mentioned, what if I try to intercept and I try to play around? Like, what if I don't want 1? What if I want 2, right? Let's just try to see what I get. So I keep forwarding, I keep forwarding. Oh, it gives me something else. Like that is a classic example of IDOR, which is without any authentication, I was able to access some other user's basket. So that's a flaw. Okay, what else can I do? Let's try to like see, I'll just go on this page. Okay. To be honest, I don't really like green smoothie, right? And I'm just gonna like read the review that this sucks. Like I really don't know. But I don't want an admin to post this. I don't want as an admin, like my review should be gone there. So what I'll just try to do is I'll try to intercept this request. And if I keep going forward, you'll see that, okay, you know what? It's actually posting my reviews. So, but the author is me. That's not what I want. Let's say I'm just like, try to like see if I can modify this request and I can have some other user post it as that. So I keep going forward. I keep going forward. I think that should be it. Because if I now try to disable the intercept, there you go. I just wrote this sucks, and it's actually not admin. It's actually someone else. How do I know that? Because I am logged in as admin, and I just modified the request. So essentially, that's what the idea for CSRF is. Like, you know what? You try to imitate someone else, and you try to see if the server actually replicates or it actually authenticates if it's you. And if it's not, you can actually perform these kind of attacks on the application. How can you stop CSRF? Well, one of the main reasons I'll say CSRF really happened was the server really did not authenticate the user at each and every step. So let's say if I'm trying to like, fetch my basket or if I'm trying to leave a review, the server has to know that it's admin making the request and not someone else. So use of authorization cookies in that case. There are special tokens called CSRF tokens, which essentially means that they're unique, secret, unpredictable values. So whenever I go up to the server and if I as an admin make a request to the server, I want the server to authenticate me with that token. There's something called same-site cookies, which essentially is your what ID card, I would say. It's like an ID card. So whenever you go up to the server and be like, hey, it's me, the server lets you in, does the action that you want, and lets you out. So those are some of the ways we can actually stop using CSRF. Now, I also mentioned SQL injection before. So yeah, combining SQL injection and CSRF can actually do catastrophic things. So we do need to have these security procedures in place. Any questions for this? Awesome. If not, that brings us to the end of this workshop. Thank you so much for attending.